April 13, 2018. A tragic road accident near Warrington. A Scania lorry, transporting a trailer from Italy, was involved in a fatal crash that killed a 50-year-old man. Police arrived expecting a routine incident, but inside the truck they found something that changed everything. A body, hidden behind freight, crudely wrapped. The lorry was traced back to a haulage firm connected to a Warrington businessman, Thomas Maher. On paper, he was a modest freight operator, but when the investigators scratched beneath the surface, it turned out this was no ordinary businessman. You probably can't even imagine the full scale of it. So before we get started, I'll ask you to subscribe to the channel and put a like on the video if you really like what I'm doing. And when the video's over, let me know in the comments. Did you expect it to go this deep? Maher kept a low profile in public. No flashy cars, no outrageous spending. But he had connections across Rotterdam, Spain, the Balkans, and even South America. His transport network, designed to move industrial goods, was also moving tons of heroin and cocaine for major cartels. And the most chilling part? His trucks often carried human cargo too. Trafficked individuals, or in some cases, bodies being smuggled to avoid questions. That 2018 crash, just one piece of a puzzle the National Crime Agency had been building for years. Investigators began rechecking every route Maher's vehicles took in the past. Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Northern Ireland, and each trail led back to one central figure, always Maher. It wasn't long before they began to link him with at least 13 other transport events involving serious organized crime. This wasn't just a rogue hauler. This was a logistics mastermind for the underworld. What made a small-time Irish haulier transform into an international trafficker with blood on his trailers? Thomas Maher was born in Ireland, but had settled in a quiet cul-de-sac in Warrington. From the outside, his life looked unremarkable. Married, well-spoken, in his 40s, and running a small transport business. His neighbors described him as polite. Some even said boring. But law enforcement knew better. Behind the curtains of his detached home, encrypted phones buzzed with messages from cartel contacts, and burner sims cycled like clockwork. Maher wasn't just involved. He was orchestrating the entire European end of a transnational drug pipeline. By the mid-2010s, Maher had already built connections with key players in South American cocaine cartels and Afghan heroin traffickers. But unlike other smugglers, he avoided flash. No Lamborghinis, no gold chains, no Instagram bravado. His secret, staying invisible. Even his haulage company was registered under other names, often using shell firms in Eastern Europe. He understood the rules of the game. Move like a ghost, talk only in code, and always deny ownership of the truck, the trailer, or the cargo. He operated primarily through the Dutch ports, Rotterdam being a favorite entry point. His drivers would pick up sealed containers from legitimate warehouses, unaware that hidden compartments inside held kilos of heroin or compressed cocaine bricks. Other times, Maher himself coordinated the concealment. Fuel tanks welded with false bottoms or tires packed with powdered drugs. By 2019, he was on the radar of Europol, the Guardia Civil, the NCA, and Dutch customs, all independently. But no agency had yet connected the full picture. It was his attendance at the gangland funeral of Real IRA suspect Paul Massey in 2015 that raised one of the earliest red flags. Maher was spotted mingling with known criminals, but he left unnoticed, always just out of reach. What kind of man walks through both the criminal underworld and suburbia without leaving a footprint? The turning point came with two trucks. One was found with a dead man, suffocated and dumped like contraband. The other was intercepted in the Netherlands with over 1.5 million pounds worth of heroin, cleverly concealed behind pallets of tiles. Both were registered to companies linked to Maher. Both drivers were unaware of the true contents, or at least claimed to be, and both shipments had identical paperwork, prepared by the same logistics broker operating from a supposedly clean office in Merseyside. When the NCA looked closer, it wasn't just about the cargo, it was about the signature at the bottom, Thomas Maher. Despite the evidence stacking up, Maher was always one step ahead. He had legal teams in place to shield his companies. When customs questioned a driver, Maher would claim subcontracting had occurred. That truck isn't mine. The cargo was sealed when we collected it. We only handle paperwork. The denials were smooth, rehearsed, but the agencies weren't buying it anymore. In a particularly audacious case, one of his trucks was stopped in Belgium. On board were 85 kilograms of heroin disguised as construction material. The shipping manifest had Maher's signature, this time under a false name traced to a dormant company registered in the Isle of Man. Investigators began noticing a pattern. Maher was rotating through a web of front companies, all tied to transport, logistics, or recycling, and they all seemed to touch Rotterdam, Liverpool, or Antwerp. Then came the surveillance footage. Cameras at a Rotterdam dock captured Maher personally supervising the loading of one specific container. Days later, the container was found in the UK, emptied of tiles, stuffed with cocaine. It wasn't just his drivers anymore. Maher himself was getting his hands dirty. What convinced a man so careful, so strategic, to start taking personal risks? The breakthrough came when international agencies started working together. The NCA, Europol, and Dutch authorities agreed to compare intel, surveillance logs, intercepted communications, and customs reports. Maher's name, or variations of it, kept surfacing across different databases. But the key wasn't just in names, it was in the phones. Maher was using encrypted EncroChat devices, those infamous black handsets beloved by the European underworld. The same ones that cost thousands, promised military-grade anonymity, and, unbeknownst to him, had already been compromised. When the French police cracked EncroChat in early 2020, Maher's digital footprint was exposed like never before. Investigators found hundreds of messages between Maher and multiple cartel figures, discussing routes, weights, payment drops, and backups in case of seizure. He was always calm, always calculated. In one exchange, he reassured a contact after a load had gone missing, casually texting, "Cost of business, we move again next week." They found Excel files, route maps, and even port diagrams, showing which warehouses had weaker inspections. In the margins, Maher had written initials. Some matched real customs officers, now under internal review. Others were never identified. Then there were the voice notes, dozens of them, casually recorded in a thick Irish accent, joking about customs dogs, bribing dock workers, and sending clean lads for dirty jobs. The paper trails were no less revealing. Offshore bank accounts in Cyprus and Panama, shell companies linked to Dubai real estate, thousands in unexplained payments transferred from consulting firms to Maher's wife's name, a £70,000 Rolex bought in cash, and a luxury villa in Spain that didn't exist on paper, until drone footage placed Maher sunbathing there 2 weeks after he claimed to be in Liverpool. How many smuggling empires stay hidden just because no one compares the notes? The scope of the operation was staggering. Over a 2-year span, Thomas Maher's network was suspected of transporting at least 21 tons of Class A drugs, primarily heroin and cocaine, across European borders. His preferred method, diversion tactics. He'd send a decoy lorry on one ferry while the real load traveled an hour later from a different port. Sometimes the drugs were hidden in hollowed-out industrial equipment. Other times, in pallets of insulation foam where sniffer dogs struggled to pick up the scent. It wasn't just clever concealment, it was industrial-level smuggling, The heroin typically originated in Turkey and Afghanistan, arriving in Rotterdam before being driven to Merseyside, Manchester, and Birmingham. Cocaine, on the other hand, followed a different path. Brought in from Brazil or Colombia, it often entered via Spanish or Dutch ports. From there, Maher's lorries took over, driving the bricks straight into Britain under forged invoices and shipping manifests. A single load could net millions. It wasn't just the volume that shocked investigators, it was the frequency. Sometimes 2 or 3 shipments per week. Some trucks carried 30 kilos, others over 200. In one intercepted load, customs officers found 186 kilograms of cocaine stashed inside ceramic tiles, each one carefully resealed with resin to avoid detection. That shipment alone was valued at nearly £14 million. Maher didn't rely on low-level criminals. He hired ex-military drivers, men with no criminal records, trained to follow tight security protocols and to never ask questions. And if one was caught, Maher had a script ready: legal aid, clean contracts, and deniability. He never touched the product, never signed for it, never stood at the warehouse. But the trail always led back to him. Emails, GPS pings, or just his voice saying, "Drop it behind gate 3. What kind of mind builds a criminal empire this meticulously and still believes he's untouchable? But for all the encryption and logistics, Maher's downfall began with something painfully human: a funeral. In July 2015, Salford gangster Paul Massey was shot dead in a targeted attack outside his home. The funeral was a high-profile event, attracting major figures from the British underworld, among them Thomas Maher. He didn't hide in the background, he shook hands, he spoke to families. He even helped arrange the transport of the body, and the hearse, registered to a business linked to his name. That gesture, seemingly respectful, lit a fuse. Intelligence officers had eyes on the funeral and took note of Maher's interactions. Later, when other cartel-linked individuals began reappearing in Maher's communications, the picture became clearer. He wasn't just a Haulier. He was a trusted player in a wider ecosystem of British and European organized crime. And funerals, as it turned out, were his networking events. In 2018, Maher was also linked to another high-profile gangland funeral, this time in Northern Ireland. Again, he personally oversaw the transport of the deceased. Again, the vehicle was connected to his logistics operation, and once again, he was caught on camera, quietly conversing with known drug traffickers under surveillance. Meanwhile, investigators noticed something else. Maher used funeral routes to justify unorthodox cross-border vehicle movements. Body repatriation provided the perfect excuse for long-haul travel, often with minimal checks. The lorries used were often double-purposed, fitted with false panels or dual compartments. On one such trip, a hearse was caught on ANPR crossing into the UK. Customs flagged it, but no inspection was done. Days later, 47 kilos of heroin were found in a vehicle registered to the same company. When a man uses grief and death as camouflage for his drug empire, what kind of conscience does he carry behind the wheel? By early 2020, the walls were closing in. The EncroChat hack had given the NCA everything it needed: timestamps, coordinates, voice messages, aliases. Maher's alias, satirical. Investigators knew when he slept, where he drove, who he trusted. But the final move came with one final shipment. A load was scheduled to arrive at a UK port. Paperwork flawless. Vehicle registered in Poland. Destination listed as a farm in Shropshire. But this time, the NCA let it go through. They didn't stop it, they followed it. For 36 hours, the lorry crisscrossed back roads, made multiple stops, and finally reversed into a private barn. Minutes later, Maher arrived in a separate vehicle. What followed was a textbook arrest. Officers in unmarked vans moved in. Maher, caught mid-call on his Encro phone, tried to crush it underfoot. Too late. They already had every message. The raid triggered a domino effect. Simultaneous searches were launched at Maher's Warrington home, a rented flat in Spain, and several commercial properties in the Midlands. In total, authorities recovered £600,000 in cash, multiple encrypted phones, business records showing fake invoices, hidden compartments in transport trailers. Oh, a stash of designer watches worth over £100,000. Evidence of £1.5 million in unexplained international transfers. At his trial, Maher insisted he was just a middleman, a consultant for European hauliers. But the messages told a different story. In one, he bragged about a single shipment clearing more than enough for the year. In another, he instructed a driver to dump the load if blue lights show. The court sentenced him to 14 years for conspiracy to traffic cocaine and heroin. But one mystery lingered. Dozens of shipments, carefully mapped in his EncroChat, were never found. Some were headed for the UK. Others, no one knows. What would we uncover if we opened every container he ever moved? Even after sentencing, the financial web Maher left behind kept investigators busy. For a man who claimed modest means, he had access to international luxuries few could explain. In Dubai, he held property under a nominee's name, 2 apartments in Marina Tower. In Spain, a luxury villa purchased with laundered funds through a bogus recycling company. He owned watches from Patek Philippe, Richard Mille, and Audemars Piguet, none declared, and a fleet of vehicles registered to shell firms across the Isle of Man, Poland, and Liechtenstein. The National Crime Agency estimated that Maher moved at least £13 million in criminal cash during his reign, with much of it either laundered abroad or spent on high-end goods. In 2021, the NCA hit him with a civil recovery order, stripping Maher and his wife of their assets, including their home, their vehicles, and a 6-figure bank account in Cyprus. Investigators revealed he had used over 70 false identities and financial records. But even stripped of wealth and sentenced to prison, Maher never spoke. No names, no deals, no evidence against higher-ups. He was a vault, silent. And that silence made one thing clear. Maher wasn't the top. He was trusted enough to run logistics for Europe's largest cartels, but not powerful enough to act alone. In messages, he referred cryptically to the office and El Jefe, but law enforcement has yet to identify who or where those figures are. As the final warrants were executed, officers found one last surprise: an unused encrypted phone hidden inside a hollowed-out book in Maher's bedroom. Its battery removed, unused, but ready. A backup. A sign that Maher, even in his last days of freedom, was prepared to disappear if needed. This empire was collapsed, but as soon as one is destroyed, a new one is born. Somewhere right now, a new drug trafficking empire is rising, and we have to fight it.